I'm Matt Bennett. I'm Vice President of Universe Services. Can you all hear me fine? Yeah. So tonight's panel is authors on editing. And the reason that we wanted to develop this discussion with our authors, we'll introduce momentarily, is that a lot of editors, especially freelancers, work with writers, and when they return their work, they don't get to have a frank conversation about the editing afterward. And that's a missed opportunity for a lot of learning and a lot of maybe extended collaboration between writers and editors. So that's why we invited our three writers, working writers, Anca Szilágyi, Jamie Swenson, and Dave Boling at the end there. For both Dave and Anca, you can find some of the books that they recently published at the table there, if you'd like to have a look. And afterwards, they will be selling them as well. Okay, so for tonight's conversation, we're just going to have about an hour of guided conversation between myself and the three writers here. And then we'll have a half hour of audience-directed questions. So if you do have a question, save it for the end, and we'll bring you. I'll ask the question for the camera so that we'll get the audio for it. Okay, I'm super nervous because I'm in front of a camera, and that just puts me off my game a little bit. So we're going to start really basic here, and that's just some questions about what kind of editing you've received and what you found remarkable about the process. So if one of you would like to jump in, just let us know what types of editing that you've received. Was it in-house? Was it freelance? And was it developmental? Was it copy editing? That sort of thing. And if you'd like to comment on the process.
So all of the editorial feedback I've gotten has been in-house, but both line editing, developmental editing, copy editing. And one thing that I found remarkable in working with my editor at Lanternfish Press, who published my first novel, we had a conversation early on, just determining where the manuscript was. I asked her what kind of editing it required, and she thought it was mostly developmentally there, but once she gets into the line edits, she might have other ideas. So I thought, okay, that's fine. It seems like no major surgery required. That's a relief. But sure enough, after I got her edits, and she, the line edits, these are repeated words. You can only use chartreuse once in a manuscript. But also here are some notes on chapters 9 to 11. And those were the chapters I had doubts about, but did not express them, so I was very relieved. And so my novel's about a teenage runaway, and so in those chapters, there's just a little too much wandering. And she's having kind of a breakdown, but it's kind of hazy. So the remarkable question that my editor asked me was, if a psychologist or psychiatrist were reading those pages, how would they diagnose this character? And as a reader, I kind of recoiled from that question because in a book club, for example, I'd never want to diagnose a character. But from an editorial standpoint, it was super helpful in terms of being more selective in detail and then sort of amplifying other specific details. So it was both cohesive and I could sort of escalate to the climax in my novel. So I decided she was having a stress-induced psychosis, and then I was able to look it up. And yeah, I thought that was an awesome question.
Oh yeah. So I work at the University of Washington, and I'm a lot more production focused, a lot of deadlines, just trying to get stuff out of the door. So I do get a lot of line edits, just tell me what to fix, we'll fix it, and the voice of my writing is not actually mine, it's the voice of the university brand. So the editors, I think, understand. I have two editors, one is editor, and one is my boss editor, and they can both override me. So there's not a lot of ego involved. We're just trying to get the job done. But I think that what I've admired most about both of them is the way that they're able to guide me towards realizing what I need to do rather than telling me to. I mean, sometimes we'll get into heading line editing and I need this back by 5 and then I'm going to send it on, but then other times they will present questions in a way that suggests something that I'm trying to do that I'm not quite aware of.
Hi, I'm Dave, and every kind of editing. I've dealt with hundreds of editors, 37 years as a newspaper journalist, sports columnist. I've dealt with editors around the world. The last 10 years, I've dealt with editors around the world with 2 novels that I've written. And of those many hundreds, there probably weren't more than 3 that I really wanted to get in a fist fight with. And I think that's a pretty good percentage, and they deserved it because they were tinkerers. And that's the one thing that really bothers me, the absence of communication and trying to turn the story into theirs, rather than understanding that the editor and the writer is a partnership. It is a collaboration. Ego will torpedo a relationship between an editor and a writer. And one of the first things that I like to do is to give them equity in this project, to let them know that this is something we are doing together. It is to both of our best interests to make this the best product. When someone starts getting some equity in how they think it should go, then that blocks everything, and then people start drawing lines, and you have to, I like to say, it's like a marriage. It requires communication, respect, a sense of partnership, and I guess maybe to enforce that metaphor, I'm now married to an editor. And we actually get along great, and we're working on a collaborative novel, and she works editing for a marketing group that's, oh my God, it's copy editing from cruise ship lines and having to go through and check timetables and time zones and all that. And she comes home with her eyes kind of going like, cartoon guys. And, but it's sure nice to have an in-house editor, I would say that. So, anything you want to know about any kind of editing, I've got experience with.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you all. Building on that, considering the editor-writer relationship as a kind of marriage, if you will, but even in a marriage, in a partnership, it's best to maybe balance your questions with your prescriptions. It's one thing for an editor to ask you to do something, but when production writing, you oftentimes encounter demands. You need to change this in a certain way. Would you be able to comment on how to balance that? Making queries versus making demands on the writing.
I can start with this one. I think, and we might come back to this point again and again, but confirming your writer's goals is really important. Phone conversation, in person if possible, over email works. Just understanding where they are. I think what I do is very different than novel writing. So I think that my editors take a lot more and are encouraged to take more license with their edits, but it's still important for them to ask me and for me to tell them where I am and what I need from them. It might be a long-form piece, and for us, long-form is a homepage story, which is like 600 or 700 words, so not super long. But I might be working with a few different units within the university, people that want kind of a marketing piece, and then I'll have to interview the subject, and then there will be some kind of high-level strategy, and then a fundraising angle. So it feels like, what even is this? And so I'll ask them directly for developmental edits and ask them to figure out what it's trying to do, because sometimes I can just be like completely lost in all these different these different stakeholders' goals. And then other times, lost my train of thought here. I will tell them, like, look, I need this. I need to be done with this on Tuesday. It's about 200 words long. Can you help me get it down? And in that case, I completely welcome their cuts. I will go through and look at the edits, and if it's just something kind of odd, or if it changes the truth of it a little bit, I'll have to go reverse that. And then usually I'll let them know why I changed something. So it is a kind of a back and forth relationship communication.
Anca, you want to?
I was just going to say, I do my own writing sometimes, and my favorite thing to ask for is, please make this shorter for me. It's nice. It's so nice to have someone else take an next to it.
Yeah, so in terms of balancing asking questions and making prescriptions, and also that sort of that relationship that you build with an editor, and also related to knowing where you are in the process. I think all those things kind of come together when you decide whether to ask a question or make a prescription, or whether a prescription late in the game is actually completely too much. And so for my example is, with my novel, I was making some very last minute changes to the last half of the last sentence. And so I just really wanted it to be just right. And I think only because I was doing this, my editor brought up feedback she had gotten from her intern and from her copy editor that she had not passed on to me, but because now I had opened the door, she's like, well, they think you should just cut out the whole epilogue. They think it would be like more emotionally gutting if it stopped, you know, at the end of chapter 13. And like, I had been working on this novel for years, and I kind of felt it was important. My novel's about a disappeared person, and the epilogue kind of returns to the disappeared person. So I was pretty disturbed by the suggestion. I understood editorially why someone would be like, oh, it would be like more gutting if you ended here, but I also thought that that chapter was really important. And so my editor said, just think about it over the weekend and let me, you can go either way, whatever you want. So I came back to her on Monday and I was like, I can tighten this, but this has to stay. That there's historic context here that readers are just not gonna look up. Like, they're just not gonna do it. And so she said, you know what, I thought about it and I still really like it. So in terms of like that balance of having a good collaborative relationship with an editor and knowing when to make suggestions and when not, I think is important.
I've got a couple examples of that sort of delicate dance that you have, that writers have with editors. And I handle two in different ways. And I think it's important to be generous to the editors. And if you have developed that relationship, maybe they aren't being generous with you, but if you do it with them, that might open it up so they can understand and explain what you're trying to get at. Now, when it's editors of novels, they are the ones who bought your book. They're the one who went to the bosses and said, we need to buy this. I want to work on this. So novel editors, or development editors, tend to be very much on your side. And in some cases, they like the book more than you do. And that's kind of what I had, which is a really nice thing with my first novel, Guernica. Lindsay Sagnet with Bloomsbury bought it, loved it. And I mean, I had to say, settle down, Lindsay, it's not that good. And I wanted to cut it a little bit. Once she got it, we started talking about it and found a little bit of focus. It was a big book. It's kind of an epic thing, a war thing, a multi-generational family story set during the Spanish Civil War. And I said, you know, Lindsay, I think I can trim down this early part to get into more of the areas that have more narrative drive without setting up so much scene if I cut a brother of this family. And she said, oh, I love Josepe. We can't cut him. And I said, I kind of think we could get into everything. No, 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 we don't have to. And I said, okay, how's this? Let me try this for you. I will write a version. I will put together a quickly edited, cut version with Josepe out of it. And she says, I get the Pepsi challenge? And I said, take a look at both of them, and you tell me what you want. And I pounded out, copied, cut, and pasted, and I did surgery on it, and sent it back to her, and she read it, and she said, honestly, I think you need to keep Josepe. And I did. So it was, and it went fine. I don't know that I still agree with her or not, but I trusted her view on it, and I knew she was doing it because she felt that was the best thing for the story. In my latest novel, The Lost History of Stars, it's narrated by a 14-year-old girl. Basically, she is older and looking back to when she was 14 years old and in a concentration camp that the British established in South Africa during the Anglo-Boer War. When I found out the British did this, I thought, why didn't I know this? And 27,000 women and children died in this concentration camp during the war. People don't know this. It was more children died than soldiers. And I felt an obligation to tell this story. So my developmental editor, we got along fine, everything went smoothly until the copy editor got it. And when she sent the galley proofs back, every time my young girl, who was of the very devout Dutch Reformed Church, very much of the Old Testament philosophy, every time she used the pronoun for God, I had it capitalized as he. She, every time, put an LC on that. And I'm thinking, wait a second, and I went back to the editor and said, remember, this is my young girl at that time narrating her situation from her perspective. If I don't keep true to her personality, she then is an unreliable narrator. And the editor said, this is our style. Well, okay, the style book is different from the context, and it is important. And people who are religious will be upset by that. But more than that, it will be false to the character. And my editor, who was a freelance editor, stood by it. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to talk to Chuck, my developmental editor. And Chuck got involved and went with the capitalization. And afterwards, the copy editor got back to me. You're right. You're right. I shouldn't have tried to push you with this. You're right. And so it was communication. I kind of needed somebody with a little arm bending and the hammer to convince her that needed to be on the case.
Wonderful. So it sounds like timing is a really important thing for advice. Having a generosity between the writer and the editor. Clear goals. And standing over on style over context almost sounds like something that perhaps maybe a younger editor would do. Do you have experience between the three of you? What kind of advice would you have for a younger editor versus an older editor? I expect we have different, along the career, different expectations from writers. So maybe you can provide us some wisdom on that.
That one's jumping out at me because before my current role, I was the editor at the Seattle Symphony, and I don't think I knew entirely what I was doing. I wasn't formally trained as an editor. I had a degree in creative writing and a master's in literature, which I think my bosses thought meant something, but I didn't know. There was a whole lot I had to learn, and so when it came to sticking with house style, I would do that and end up getting in a lot of stressful situations because I I didn't have I was really an island. There weren't other writers there, that was me. And I wish that I had gotten together with other editors like you're doing here, or been able to email people or talk with them and say, like, is this hill worth dying on? Do I need to go to the mat for this, or do I make an exception and then make sure it's consistent? So I just think that talking to other editors and picking their brains, which is what I'm able to do with my current editors now, it's really great to just watch them. They'll talk to each other and kind of hash it out, and you realize that it's not black and white all the time, and a lot of times you do have to think it through and think about ramifications and what it means down the line and all of that stuff. So talk to people.
They don't take it. I haven't dealt with many young editors since I was young. We talk about older editors on Bennett's career.
So I think he was a younger editor. I never met him. It was all over email. But so in terms of tinkers, I had pitched an essay to a magazine for like an online portion of the, they produce a lot online. I won't say which publication it is, but so I pitched this piece. It was supposed to be a lyric essay about plums, and they accepted it. And by the time they got to the edits, the nature of the whole series of essays that it would be a part of had changed. And there was no communication about that. And so no, I think the important thing is to be in agreement between writer and editor in terms of what is the goal and purpose of the piece, right? So, and he was a PhD student at a university somewhere far away from me, and his edits were extremely prescriptive in a way that I thought was making my writing worse. So just sort of basic ideas about what a topic sentence should be, and whether, what's my argument. And I was thinking, I'm not arguing about the role of plums in society. But I was very patient because I really wanted to be published with this magazine, and this went on for over a year, because there'd be months would go by before I'd get edits on a draft. And then finally, I got so frustrated, I pulled the essay and I sent it to another publication in the form that I envisioned, and it was published, and I was very happy. But just this lack of communication about what the goal is can create problems like that. So.
Since you mentioned it, now I can remember back to when I was a young editor without any schooling or education in journalism. I was an out-of-work logger, excuse me. And went into answered an ad in the newspaper and talked my way into a job as an entry-level sports writer at the Coeur d'Alene Press in Idaho. And I think I got the job because I fixed the guy's typewriter while I was. This is how long ago it was, and so I knew nothing. I took the style book at home and I kept it in the bathroom, and sometimes I would take a bath instead of a shower so I could learn the style book. And with journalism, it's like the MASH units used to see, where you do whatever you can to plug up the bleeding on deadline. And it's difficult, and a lot of times I would have to take pictures myself, go in, soup the film, print the pictures, take calls on wrestling results, and then lay out the section and edit somebody's copy. And within a month, you really know what you're doing. You are by necessity forced into learning this. And the thing that I developed over the years with desk editors in the newspaper is it's a very, very difficult job. Things come at you on deadline. The stress, the pressure is really difficult, and you have no idea what kind of pile of crap somebody's going to lay on your desk on deadline. And you have to make something of it because there's no big holes in newspapers. Something fills that space. And if it's wrong, it's really, really the editor's fault. So you try to be patient, and the thing that I hated when I dealt with editors was an absence of passion for the job. When I wanted people to say, okay, hey, I got it, let's get after this. If it's somebody like, oh, it should have been 5 minutes ago, I got 3 other things, and you know that it's going to be botched. And that again is this relationship of communication. If someone has less passion than you do about your product, you better make sure that thing is clear and clean. I have an example that, should I go on to, have I gone too much here? An example of, I have an example, we can maybe move on to this. Just this weekend of great editing. I was working for ESPN.com, stringing some features for them on the Special Olympics. It was in town. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was a tremendous event. If you had any cynicism about, well, I'm sure you do, about the world around us, this was such an antidote to that. The stories and what these people have been through, and the courage that they showed to be where they are. I mean, oh gosh, it was so inspiring. So I was interviewing a man who's now 40 with Down syndrome, and he had been a Special Olympic athlete since he was 8 years old, and he is now called the International Global Messenger, which I thought sounded kind of like an intergalactic emissary or something. But he is so articulate, and he is a spokesman for Special Olympic meetings really around the world. And he has a smile, and I tried to describe it in this story. And my version that I sent in the lead was, David Egan's smile should be a ticketed event. It strikes like an explosion at a fireworks stand, a burst of light and energy and warmth, reaching peak incandescence whenever he talks about his work. And I thought, okay, I wanted that image, that it was this explosion, you know, and I thought about a fireworks stand, you know, shooting. That's how this guy's smile made you feel. And the editor got back to me, and there was the thought that maybe somebody might have been hurt in an explosion at a fireworks stand. It could be dangerous. Now, I was trying to create this. I got the image. I liked it. It was part of being creative, I think, and the image worked for me. The editor jumped in and took it one step further as a reader. The editor is your first reader. She is your conscience. She is your auxiliary logic. And in this case, this lead turned into so much better. David Egan's smile should be a ticketed event. It strikes like the finale of a fireworks show. So much better, and I picked that up, and I just kind of, you know, and I just emailed, great job, thank you, that's so much better, you know, and that's what an editor can do. And I don't know if enough people get back to you and say, thanks for what you did, this is better now, but that's the relationship when it works perfectly. So, thank you.
That's wonderful. Thanks for those anecdotes. So talking with your editor, that's an important aspect of the relationship, communication. It sounds like face-to-face communication is really important. I found in my own work that, especially for developmental editing, sitting down for about an hour to discuss the project really sets the project on the right track before you actually put pen to paper. Could you say anything about sort of what kind of editing exchanges are most fruitful, and how do you structure those exchanges beyond just the face-to-face interaction?
Yeah, so certainly for those big picture issues. So with my novel, when we started, we had a phone conversation. My editor lives in Philadelphia, so we can't meet, but we had a phone conversation, sort of setting the goals initially, and then it was all email until we got to that epilogue suggestion, and we had to have a phone call. So that was useful in terms of like when you're getting these important junctures in the process. It can be really helpful to just have a conversation. And then in terms of communication, like the best editing experiences I've had have always been when editors pose questions, really. Like most recently, I had written a personal essay and I brought it to my peer review group just to get some feedback, and the feedback was, well, it needs more emotion. And I kind of went home and I looked at it and I said, I don't know how to emote. And then I revised it as best I can, and I sent it to the editor, and she had the same feedback, but she had a series of questions like, did you feel this way? Did you feel that way? How did you consider this aspect of the issue? And it just was so much easier. So I was really appreciative of that, and the edits, she loved them in the end. So being able to, I guess, be expansive in your questions can, I think that's important for me in terms of communication.
I recently wrote a piece about CoMotion, which is this innovation hub on the university campus in a few different places and online, I guess. And there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to these pieces, because we'll put money at them to promote them. And so there are, fundraising advancement officers involved. There are communications directors involved. We have to put together a creative brief and share it with everyone and make sure everyone approves it. So we did that, and that's fine. And then I sat down with the two subjects of the story, who were filmmakers working within this space, and that's where it does get interesting, is when you're telling a human story instead of just kind of writing a really long form commercial. That's what the units want, but deep down you know that your readers are more interested in reading about humans than just some puff piece about like whatever program. You gotta get people to relate with emotions. So I ended up trying to write this piece about these two filmmakers and their motivations and how they felt. This woman, Lacey, felt very excluded when she was a young woman filmmaker working in New York, and didn't feel very heard, and wanted to come back here and start a more inclusive filmmaking company that tells a wide range of diverse stories. And so I worked with my editor, my boss editor, we went over this whole creative brief, and I told her all my pain points and the different kind of pressures I was feeling, and like, all these people want this, but deep down I know this is the story. And so she and I had written it all out, and I was really trying to present her with something cleaner, because I didn't want her to waste her time hacking it up when I felt like that was my duty as the writer. But and ultimately, she really helped me find a stronger angle than I had, but I wish that I had gone to her sooner, because she, I spun my wheels when I think that if I had had a conversation with her sooner, she could have identified the same problem and identified the same places to cut, and kind of backed me up and justified these cuts.
I think the face-to-face would be nice, but it's really not practical, as I said, for novels particularly. Certainly, after the fact, you end up going to your publisher's place and then getting to know editors, and many of them feel like they're dear friends. And I want to say that's important, but I just think a professional openness is what is the most important thing to creating a great product. I'm sure my first editor in the U.S. for my first novel, I'm sure I loved her. Is there anything else I can do? Should I do this? Should I do that? What do you want me to do? I was so eager to please them. They bought my book. I love you. What can I do for you? And I think the friendship is great. Professionalism is the key in communication. And now I love Skype. Skype really is wonderful. It's so much different than the phone. How can it be? You can see their face, we look each other in the eyes, and I think then you can tell a person's sincerity and what's important to them far easier if you are looking face to face. And now you can do that without having to be at the same time.
Wonderful. So expansive questions, was that? That's a great way to think about the editing process. So yeah, ask expansive questions of your writers. And you found that getting guidance early in the writing process is really important. Otherwise, you felt like maybe you were spinning your wheels somewhat?
Yeah, when I can usually sense it pretty early on. I'm like, oh, this is going to be one. Oh, sorry. This is going to be one of those stories. Oh, I've written this story before. I can do it myself. But sometimes it just does pay to say, here's my problem, and can you see any obvious solutions here? Because I can't.
Yeah.
And maybe one thing that now you mentioned, and I'm thinking, sometimes to be expansive as an author is important too. As I love edit notes, having a little, and I go back to where it was on pages, and they'd send in there'd be notes. The thing now with the view it on the side and accept or whatever, it just seems so critical. You know, it used to be where you would do it with your pencil, and there'd be like an exclamation point, wonderful, or a smiley face or something. And I've had editors at times say, leave edit notes, and I love the edit notes. And you know what, all my marking is just corrections. That doesn't mean I didn't love this book. I love this character. You really handled this nicely. That goes a long way to developing that relationship and the trust, and again the sense that they are involved in this as well. So if the author too, and it might be something you would want to ask, tell me ahead of time if there's some points that you're looking for, or subplots that I might not be catching, because sometimes an author will plant something on page 37 that doesn't pay off until page 137 or 237, and in the editing process that will seem like an unneeded diversion at this point, and then there'll be 100 pages later. And I've had, you know, some manner of symbolism or something. A woman character I had lost a baby, had a miscarriage, and since one of the daughters is telling the story, she didn't know this, but I had to kind of subtly draw that scene. So she was having pains and wanted the kids to get away, and my editor didn't catch that the first time around. When she got to the end of it, thinking she had a miscarriage. What? When was this? And so I think in that case, maybe authors should add some expanded notes as well.
Good, thank you. This is another reason why you should always read the manuscript twice. Good idea for editors. And I think you're right. It's really hard sometimes to not come across as really testy and picky. And as a tinkerer, especially with the technology, that there's something that's bloodless about it.
I hate it.
It can be really bad. I have to remind myself to make positive comments, especially because I'm enjoying the manuscript. But when you're paid to be analytical about the reading of something, and then the technology itself kind of pushes you towards a critical.
Even if it's like moving, if you change ellipsis to a long dash, or you change an end dash to an M dash, or something or other like that, it's still got those damn dots on there going over to the side. And I was like, oh my God, you look at 400 pages or whatever, and it's all marked.
It's the ghosts of punctuation erased.
Yes.
So can you tell me that when each of you, it sounds like in order to develop this partnership, marriage, if you will, that communication is really important. When did you find as a working writer that you trusted your editor? Like, how did that process occur? If you can speak to it.
Yeah, so after the initial discussion with my editor who acquired the book, I wouldn't say I completely trusted her yet. I mean, I felt pretty good about the direction we were going in, but it wasn't until I got that initial editorial letter and she explained her rationale and the trends she noticed. And I think she did a good job in the marginal notes to include some smiley faces and some walls and or LOL. I always think wall. Anyway, so it never felt, I mean, certainly there were many suggestions she was making, but I think, yeah, with that, I felt really good once I had that initial set of edits. So after that first phone call,
I went to Yellowstone for a week and was writing a story about that. And so when you go somewhere for a week, your story tends to be 2,000 words instead of 800 words, which is what it needed to be. And I think it ended up being a little bit longer than that. But there were problems with, for this particular project, my editor had been hired maybe 2 months before that, and so I got back and it was like, here you go, help me. And I was having, we were still trying to find this creative vision for the web development. We were turning it into like more of a experience website, and she worked with me to kind of to get a sense of where design met creative, and so I really appreciated her not just looking at the words, but going beyond them to the bigger context of the piece. And we even went and chatted with the designer and tried to get a sense for exactly how long it could be in places and how short it needed to be in places before we started making cuts. So that was extremely helpful for me.
Some you trust, some you don't. And one thing, I had a developmental editor who sent me notes that had probably 25 misspellings, and including my name, Dave Boling. And I think that kind of put me on edge, and I was a little wary after that. I talked to the agent, and I said, look, I'm going to be cool about this. I don't need to alienate this editor. Just be real careful in what you do. And you always, particularly with the book, you get a galley back, and then you will be working with a copy editor. And I was very, very glad that I didn't kind of get nasty about it or critical. Because then the developmental editor really pushed it, and it got very nice play and emotion, etc. Because of that. And the copy editor thereafter took care of all the issues. Then the copy editor took care of all the issues. So it was really a moot point. It was a good thing to swallow my criticism, knowing that we could fix it.
Okay, before we get to the audience's questions, which we're coming up upon fairly soon, maybe the three of you would like to take a stab at your editing manifesto, or just enlighten us with some interesting and helpful anecdotes. Jump right in.
Manifesto sounds like the Unabomber. I don't think he would have dealt with editors very well. Ted, you gotta cut this stuff. Way too long. For me, we've covered it, I think. And it is just being a decent human being to each other, knowing that your welfare and the editor's welfare are a shared concern. And once you start thinking, and there are authors, I know you're not going to believe this, that have some egos. Don't touch my work. Oh boy, you know. Come on. You know, there's a great story about Faulkner. For some reason, Sports Illustrated sent William Faulkner to cover the Kentucky Derby. And he sent one giant block of copy without punctuation. Just to make the editor do his job. And when he did, it came out to be this beautiful Faulknerian piece of an event. I don't think that would fly today and with anybody short of William Faulkner. So I think it's just being a human being and treating people nice. Because the words are important. When somebody can help you make it better, then that's working you towards your goal.
Yeah, I second that. Just being kind in general, being pleasant to work with. Obviously, in a lot of cases, the writer will hire you because he or she wants feedback. So you know, you're there to be direct, but kind, I think. That's what I would prefer the most. And then I'd also say that every writer and every editor are different. So keep in mind that your style might be different than others' style and writers' styles. Like, we all might want different things, and that's where having a conversation or some sort of idea exchange at the beginning is extremely useful.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, just watching tone, being able to ask, I like to say, neutral questions. This is something I learned in the MFA, where we really focused on asking questions that you were genuinely curious about, and not like veiled opinions where like really you should just tell them what you think. Yeah, along those same lines, trying not to be condescending with someone if they're like starting out and have a lot of work to do, but sort of coaching them instead. Yeah.
Okay, if I remember correctly, while we were having beers together, you mentioned editing giving you a nosebleed.
Oh, yeah.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that was one of the best editing experiences I ever had. I was getting to the end of my line edits on my novel, and so this was the part where those chapters 9 to 11, where like I had to really focus in on what was going on mentally and emotionally with the characters. And by the end of it, I was like sweating, crying, and like blood was dripping down from my nose. And I was like, "Whoa, I think her work is done."
That's a goal for everyone out there. Okay, so we have time now for audience questions, unless any of you would like to make an additional comment.
I have one more comment.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I think this is because I'm pretty convinced. I know that everybody in journalism that I worked with had a manuscript somewhere they were working on. I suspect editors do too. And when I do presentations, I love to tell people that I never wrote a word of fiction until I was 53 years old. I had no idea how to tell a story. I read a lot. I had some facility with the language because I was a journalist writing columns. And I realized that the newspaper business, in 2005, the newspaper business was going to die out from under me. What am I going to do? Do I have an escape route? And that night I was down covering the Mariners in spring training, and I went back to my hotel and I started working on it. And about a year and a half later, it was sold around the world. So if I can do it, you can do it. Keep working at it. That's the thing. And the big thing is so many people write an early version and they think, you know, this doesn't look like a book. This isn't up to the standard. Well, nobody's first draft is up to the standard. So much of it is in the rewrites and learning what you're doing wrong and taking out the things you did wrong and leaving the things that you did right. And then all of a sudden, it looks like a book. And I think a lot of people give up because they think, oh, I'm wasting my time. No, enjoy the process. Do it. It's meaningful. And I never thought of, okay, I'm going to sell this, because I thought that was far-fetched. What were the chances of some sports writer turning into a novelist? And I just wouldn't let that stop me. And I think that's a big important thing for editors who want to try to get onto the other side of it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know a lot of editors are also writers. I guess I include myself among them. So it sounds like editors, I hadn't kept a clear list, but we are teachers, collaborators, partners, friends, husbands and wives, among other things. Yeah, thank you for your anecdotes and comments and suggestions so far. And we're going to open it up to the audience now for questions. And if you'd like to stand up, say your question. I'm going to try to repeat it in the microphone so everyone can hear it just in case. But yeah, the floor is open now.
Yeah.
Warren, please.
So for those of you who write fiction, do you go to like writers' conferences or anything like that? And if so, like, what do you get out of going?
Okay, the question is, do you go to writers' conferences? And if so, is it beneficial?
I do. So there are two kinds of conferences I've been to. I've been to AWP, Association of Writers and Writing Programs, which is like the largest writing conference, and what I get out of that is more information about different aspects of publishing or fiction writing, and networking. I mean, the big draw for that is networking. And then I've been to two smaller, I've been to the Port Townsend Writers Conference and the Tin House Writers Conference, which is really more craft focused. And so you're in a workshop with peers who I'm still in touch with like 8 years later. So you get to develop better relationships with other writers and learn from master teachers, and then so I do find them helpful.
I've never gone to one of those. I'm a little like people talking about writing. It's such an individual process. I almost don't trust what somebody's going to tell me. I don't know that it'll apply. My wife goes to those, and as Anca says, the networking and developing people you can you can bounce ideas off. I think that's really a key part of it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? I saw a hand over here.
Oh yeah, I should stand up. Sure. When you're working with a developmental editor, or I'm a developmental editor, I get concerned sometimes. I get so excited about a manuscript, I get like that, and sometimes I wonder if I give too much input, and I'm just wondering if you prefer for me to edit before we work together what my input would be, or if you want to hear all of it, and then you decide to sort and prioritize what the input is. Because I get afraid of overwhelming my writers with my enthusiasm.
Okay, I think the question would be, can an editor share too much about their reading experience of your manuscript? So,
yeah.
I have the same problem.
Okay.
I mean, I share that concern as a teacher of writing. Like, I try to hold back and not say everything that I'm thinking, because you have to manage the cognitive load. And this week we're focusing on character. Next week I'll look at cliches or something. But I guess as a writer, I guess I don't mind. I mean, it depends on the nature, right? It depends on the tone of the, probably enthusiastic reader response would be fine, but I think this is a matter of, at the beginning of the editor-writer relationship, just asking the writer, like, how would you like to receive the feedback? Do you want it all at once, or should we kind of go step by step with, like, larger order concerns and then kind of moving down?
Yeah, I do, with a previous editor, I remember kind of getting too much feedback and being totally overloaded. I think that in this particular case, what I got from her was a lot of different ways of saying the same thing, and follow-up emails saying that. And this was like a coworker, boss editor, so it wasn't like someone I hired. And I'm assuming you would package it all neatly in one email. So I felt like there wasn't I don't know, there wasn't like a goal with the feedback I was getting. It was just kind of everything, and I couldn't take it in. So in that case, I wish that it had been, I kind of wish that she had reviewed the cumulative effect of everything she was saying, and maybe said, okay, well, I made this comment and this comment. Well, they're both saying the same thing, and kind of edited herself.
I love your passion. Will you work on my next novel, please? I want you to be my first reader. You read this for me. As authors, we work maybe a year or two or however long on a book. There are no surprises in it for us. We don't know really what works. Is this funny? Is this poignant? Is this impactful here? We kind of lose track of that. So what I really love from a developmental editor, the things that the author loses over time: pace, proportion, voice. Okay, we outline maybe and you fill it up, and you may not realize you have gone 4 chapters that were not action and had 3 straight that were action. That's where an editor can really help. Or you have had too much of this character and not enough of another. That's the proportion that an author loses sight of. And voice is a thing that's very, very difficult to sustain for an author over the length of time that you're writing this thing. 2 or 3 years as an author, think how much a person's life changes. A reader may spend 3 days or a week with a book, and they can tell when the voice kind of wanders or doesn't ring true, and that's very hard for an author to go back because they know the story so well. Even as you're editing it, you'll kind of just go over things, and I think that's really the crucial thing for developmental editors.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there? Yes, please.
Do you recall the first time you were edited and what they call it? Was there a lot of red ink, or was there a good comment, or was there? You might go back to your English teacher. I don't know.
Do you remember the first time you were edited, and how much did it hurt?
Well, yeah, this wasn't an edit, but the kind of comment that sticks with you, like in fiction you say that like, you only remember verbatim the things that are terrible. And I had a history teacher write on my paper, not your best work. And that's it, like no feedback. First time getting edits, the first time, I think I worked with an inexperienced editor / an inexperienced writer who, she was editing an anthology of horror stories. I don't really write horror, but I had a story that fit. And she accepted it and then made changes that I didn't think were very good, but I thought, well, it's her anthology and she knows the genre, so I'll just stick with it. But then in terms of good experiences, I mean, I think I kind of covered it, but editors who can ask questions that help bring out the vividness of the writing and the world that you're building has been helpful to me for a long time.
Starting out with no experience as a sports writer in a newspaper, I read sports and read stories, and so I tried to, make it look like I thought it should look like. And I had a sports editor and a managing editor, and the sports editor suggested I should add some more color to a game story, and I kind of thought I did. And the managing editor came in and said, "Boling, that was wretched excess." And so it was at that point that I figured out I was a little too enthusiastic for the numbers. But you learn, and again, if you go, "Oh my God, my feelings are hurt," you're not going to make it as a writer. So you have a choice.
Yeah, I don't have a specific incident I remember, but I do remember early on hating writing, but it kept taking the classes for some reason. And not knowing always thinking something was good, but not knowing if it was going to get an A or like a request for a rewrite. And just, it was like rolling the dice. I didn't have that kind of awareness where now I can just be aware that something doesn't have it, or something has potential. And then, interestingly, so I recently took a poetry class, and I'm absolutely not a poet, and I kind of went through that process again because I thought that what I was writing was decent, and it was like 1 out of every 5 people got good responses, and so it was like, oh, this is kind of a flashback to when I was first writing essays.
So changing genre has made you a beginning writer again. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding the full circle. Have you, years later, gotten feedback from your readers, and then you and your editor said, yes, we got it, or oh crap, we didn't get it? And insights to that?
So after the publication, have you gotten responses from readers that let you know, you and the editor know that you really hit it?
It's the coolest thing in the world. And my first novel really did go around the world, and I would hear things from someone in New Zealand, or, you know, I have a pen pal in Russia, and we get back and forth about politics, you know, and it's an amazing thing. And as much as I enjoyed getting emails about my sports columns, you know, hey, that was a good story on Mariners, to have someone call me or email me and say that a part of your book helped me understand my life better. One woman had, I won't go into it, a number of losses in her family. And because of those, because she could not get past the pain of those losses, she was not spreading the love around to the rest of her family. So in a sense, she was sacrificing everything she had, focusing on the losses. And in my first novel, there was a character who had to learn that you can't just sacrifice those emotions. You have to reapportion them to the people who are remaining. And in this email that I have kept in a special place, she said, I should have known that, but I didn't see that in myself until I read your novel. And you know, it gives you chills when you realize that something you wrote helped people in their lives. It's one of the coolest things. You have to go write a book so you can feel it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always wonderful to hear from readers, and with the epilogue drama, I had a couple of people tell me that like I really stuck the landing with the ending, and I was like, okay, it's good. And then I had I read some reviews of the book that were, you know, the critic was baffled by some of the characters' choices, and then I had other readers come to me and be like, I feel completely seen by these characters. Like, and one of them even said, like, I had psychosis, and like, I completely feel seen right now. And I thought that was really powerful, and because then, you know, it made me think about, well, okay, well, I made some complex characters. Some people are confused by them. Some people feel completely seen by them. So that was really helpful to hear.
Any other questions? Yeah, please.
On a practical side of things, when you are getting feedback from line editor, copy editor, developmental editor, is it helpful for them to give you examples of what they mean, or does that start crossing the line into tinkering? Is it better to say for an editor, is it more helpful for an editor to just say, hey, like, this dialogue needs to be tighter, or is it more helpful to say, for example, here's what I think it could look like, or am I stepping the line when I do that?
Okay, the question seems to be, is it helpful, or is it overstepping for an editor to say, provide a sample sentence?
Yes.
I like the first option. I think you need to do this.
Okay.
With this doesn't flow, this is awkward, streamline, break up these quotes, whatever. I don't want somebody taking over the words, you know, I want to direct me in every way possible. But then throwing in sentences, which I have had people do,
right,
and then edit in typos or whatever. I really like the suggestion, and again, that's trust. I trust your judgment on this, you trust me to do what you think.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Dave. Sometimes I do appreciate occasional suggestions, like, you know, you could consider opening at something like this with kind of a general suggestion rather than being too prescriptive.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you worry you're being unclear with the suggestion, some examples can help. And like, I think hedging the way that you did, like, it could look like this, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think that can go a long way. What I consider tinkering is like going into the track changes and just like literally changing things the way they would do it. Like that, I think is unacceptable. But to have, like, if you're worried about like whether you're being clear, then I think examples can be really helpful.
Great. Okay, yeah, I find it in my own responses to writers, if I do provide sample sentences, it's because I feel like I can't explain myself otherwise. Yeah. Anyone else with a question? Yeah, Warren.
So for those of you who've had in-house dev editing, I'm just kind of curious, like, by the time it gets to an in-house dev editor, how big of a change are they making? Like, well, what kind of revisions are you doing at that point? And like, have you gotten, by that point, has it already been looked at by like a freelance dev editor, or are they the first dev editors to look at it?
Okay, so the question was, how extensive are the dev edits that you receive, say if your novel is purchased? I imagine for production writing, the dev edits can be pretty extensive. But yeah, how extensive are they?
Varies. Yeah, I've had it all kinds of ways.
Yeah, I would say it varies. I've had things that I need completely reworked, and I've asked, like, please, can you help me identify which section needs to go? It's one of these 4, and I'm equally wed to all of them. So it can completely vary, but it can be very extensive.
Yeah, I actually have not had huge developmental edits yet, but I can imagine scenarios in which, if I signed on with an agent, the agent might have developmental edits, and then they sell the book, and then the editor has developmental edits. So I can imagine scenarios when there have been many changes before it gets into the publishing house.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions out there? Don't be shy. Going once, going twice. The gentleman second.
In general, when you work with dev editors, is there anything that they could do to be more helpful?
Anything dev editors could do to be more helpful?
I've been pretty happy, again, for novels, other people who bought your book, so you tend to be big fans of theirs. Be very open to their suggestions, and because they think they can make money out of it, and they want to be attached to the project. So it's usually a very good relationship that goes very easily.
Yeah, I like the enthusiasm. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this idea. Could you draw this out more? Really seeing what the writer is trying to do and reading it twice if necessary or more, and kind of getting it. The writer might not be completely achieving his or her goals, but if you're able to kind of to get some of it and draw that out of the writer, that's helpful.
I agree. And that's something I do with my students also in workshop is require them to write like statements of meaning. So just like expressing your understanding of like what this is, the aspirations of the piece, and that leads into the the suggestions and the questions. Just showing that you're invested and understand or think you understand.
Okay, one last question. Oh yes, Pam.
Do you have questions for editors?
Do you have any questions for the editors in the audience?
Do you guys have little civil wars over Chicago Commons? It's something we had to resolve before my wife and I got married. One of those big irreconcilable sort of things. Of course, I just really appreciate the work, and I always like to, in acknowledgments, credit editors, and I'm just stunned by their knowledge and ability, and so many that would pop up from my Dutch editor, the only person in I don't even know how many different countries who translated, caught a fact about that I had about a train coming from Belgium into Paris to go into Spain, you had to go to a different station to catch them during that year. And in 1937, the Spanish Civil War, every book that I use researching this, called the fighter planes that attacked Guernica, ME-19s, whatever it was, after 51s, but Messerschmitt. And a French editor said, no, until May in 1937, that was still the Blumenflugel 51, the BF. And she was right. And every book that I read was wrong. So it's just stunning the range and depth of editors' capacity to craft yourselves. It's just applause to you folks.
I think to the outsider and to me early on in my career, I don't think I really understood the difference between a writer and editor. And I don't know if the people that hired me did, because I was clearly a writer and then I was kind of accidentally an editor. So the more editors I get to know, the more I realize that, I mean, a lot of them do write, but they love editing. And so I'm just curious how many of you would consider yourself writers and love to write also, and how many of you just love editing?
That's a pretty good plan.
Sure. What has been the best experience you've had working with a writer? Like, what's been memorable?
I just had it. This guy had his own style guide. Did you want feedback from him? He wrote the mic.
I was blessed, and I received a project that was done very much by a professional, and I didn't know what I was getting into. And he created his own style guide for me, and it made my work so easy. It was like, so that was just the best. He's really, he would communicate, like if I sent him a question, he would respond within a day or so. Made it so much easier because that way the project continued and I got done.
Anyone else have a superstar client they want to comment?
These two clients kind of,
Testimonial.
I've recently been told that I'm too nice, and I had a publisher tell me, lay it on me. I'm not going to give it to the writer. Tell me all the things. And so then, along with that, I've been working with a writer, and right off the bat, before he got any feedback from me, he said, call me on my bullshit. Like, don't be nice. I really like it if you yell. I really like mark up the page. No smiley face. I was like, okay. So it can bring out like my East Coast New Yorker side that I've been trying to suppress my entire life. My German pig farming, like, mother side. So this is a new thing for me. And I'm afraid I'm disappointing him because I still want to throw in the smiley faces.
And that's Marquis de Sade.
Hopefully we all have masochistic clients. Okay. If there aren't any more questions, no, yes? No, apparently not. I guess that will conclude this interview. Thank you to all of you, Anca, Jamie, and Dave. Remember that we have some books for sale.